Hi, folks. Thank you very much for joining us. This is ICUJP, Interfaith Communities United for Justice and Peace. Um, Thank you all for being here. We do start about 7:35 or so, but it is a Friday morning. It is LA time, and people join us as they venture out, you know, into the wilderness and stuff. So, thank you. ICUJP, as Steve already mentioned, has been doing this work for about 23 years, and it was formed by a few activists and a few people in faith organizations and faith leaders, with the simple idea that religious communities should not be blessing, must not be blessing war and violence. And it was a pretty substantial statement to make then. It still is. And as we've gone over the years, we've done a lot of things that uh, are on that path, on that idea that religious communities need to speak out for the people that are affected in their communities. I put in the chat the ICUJP link tree, which has a lot of different information on speakers, on things that they've written, projects that they're doing. Father Boyle, I'll be adding your book, recent one about kinship on there as well. And on the invite that you got for today, you also saw a note about possibly donating, and we would very much appreciate if you haven't yet, or even if you have, um, those are things that you can repeat if you'd like. Um, Please go ahead and do that. You can actually make monthly donations. You can actually you can use your PayPal, Google, three or four. You forget how much is involved when you go and do a program at a place. There's event fees, there's promotion that you have to do. There's a physical aspect. If you don't have, you need to have flyers for people. All of that is very important to have. So if you can find it in your heart to do that, that would be great. Carol Francis, I think we have you as our reflector this
Yes.
morning. If you can be reflective, that would be
All
wonderful.
right. Now that we are thinking about elections, I am reflecting on the only presidential candidate for whom I've ever seriously worked. One of the two who's openly supported Palestine, and the only one who was ever able to force the so called Democratic Party to deal with the issue. The first was Shirley Chisholm, but that was before I became political. The second was Reverend Jesse Jackson. His Rainbow Coalition was truly that, with Arabs and Jews being vital parts, as were Black and Latino urban workers and white farmers. Throughout both of his campaigns, he was smeared with the anti Semite label, rooted in the strong support for Palestine. The capitalist media revealed their bias against him immediately, but it was most obviously to me when at a huge rally, we watched the entire capitalist press corps stampede across the football field to get their mics in front of the head of the bomb setting organization, JDL. The thousands present at that rally heard a representative of the Jewish voters for Jackson, but the rest of LA would only hear the supposed Jewish perspective from a terrorist group being treated as legitimate. The capitalist media bias continued. I was furious when a paper ran the headline, Mondale, Hart, and Jesse. Yes, to most of us in the campaign, he was Jesse, but we're his family. To them, he should have been Jackson. And when the LA Times covered the meeting Jesse had with Jewish leaders, It conveniently failed to mention that our Rabbi Bierman had just bravely declared his endorsement for the campaign. For Jesse to stand up for Palestine before most peace organizations dared to do so took amazing courage. This was enough for me to get involved, but although admittedly for his 84 campaign, my involvement was limited to going to hear him 12 times, twice on television and 10 times live. The 80s, you might remember, was a time of Central America solidarity, as well as the struggle against nuclear weapons and nuclear power, and for the end of the arms race. Jesse was for all of this and more. In 1988, I got involved early. In being immersed in the Rainbow Coalition brought me together with all kinds of ethnicities, gay rights activists, peace activists, union members, small farmers, and advocates for people with disabilities. Indeed, being at a gigantic march for Jesse, the contingent of people in wheelchairs was dwarfed only by that of Jewish voters for Jackson. When we heard about the McFarland farm worker community having an extraordinarily high rate of childhood cancers because of pesticides in their water, Jesse went there to meet with them. We activists boarded buses and joined them. Someone later remarked, "Those people are immigrants. They can't vote. Why does Jackson go there?" Jesse's answer was, "Because it's the right thing to do." Now, that's my kind of candidate. Another time I was on a bus full of Jackson supporters was we went south. In a rural area just south of the border, Jesse, through a translator, addressed the Mexican people. I'm sure that there are those who ask why he did that, and I'm sure he would have given the same answer. Then there was a report back from LA activists who had gone to Iowa to organize for him. One of them told us that she had come across a small restaurant with a sign in the window reading, "You're in Jackson country." So she took off her Jackson buttons and went inside to ask a worker about it. Now, I had heard about Jesse campaigning among small farmers in Iowa about the issue of parity, which involves mechanisms to keep small farmers in business. So when this woman told us about her going inside to ask about the sign in the window, I expected the man might have answered, "Yes, Jackson supports parity," or something like that. But instead he said, "Yes, Jackson went with us to the bank and helped us renegotiate our loans." Hearing this report back excited me to sign up to go to Texas, and I was assigned to organize Austin. Human billboarding for Jesse on a bridge there and getting the tremendous support made me remark to the man standing next to me, "I can't believe we're in Texas." "You're not," he replied. "You're in Austin." Those "Keep Austin Weird" bumper stickers meant a lot to me, especially when we won the city's vote. Jesse laid so much groundwork for us. May he inspire many new candidates in the future. And I just put in the chat the links to his exhilarating convention speech and to his short Saturday Night Live piece. The question is moot. You can click on them right now and not lose anything here. Just click on both and then come right back.
Thank you very much. I love that. That I still remember that Saturday Night Live bit. The question is moot. Um, so thank you very much for sharing all of that. And We wanted to also make some time here for any ICUJP announcements. I think the biggest one that we have, and I don't know if Steve, if you have anything you want to add to this, that we are going to, as is unfortunately, we are going to have to do our closed Guantanamo rally, and we are going to be doing it Saturday, January 11th. And Steve, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about that.
Well, just briefly, early save the date for all of you. January 11 was the tragic opening or official opening of Guantanamo Bay Prison. It's not really a prison, it is a detention center outside of international law. So, and we decided to move to the West Side Federal Building on Saturday, January 11. So please put that in your calendars now. We'll be seeking our partnership with the National Religious Campaign Against Torture and all of our partners again this year, as well as key speakers to continue to protest this brutal outrage against humanity and against international and domestic law. So watch for more announcements, but for now, save Saturday, January 11 on the West Side, LA federal property. We have to set the date based on availability of speakers and the like, but save that date and join us then.
What time?
The time will depend on our speakers and arrangements to use the sidewalk outside of the federal building. So you'll get a full flyer on this as soon as possible.
Yeah, please. If you're not, also get on our mailing list so you can find out about this stuff. Please go ahead and do so. Go to icujp.org. That's one of the links on that link tree, and you can find out about all the stuff that we do. So thank you all very much for joining us. It's a very nice crowd that we have here today. And we have a great speaker for you this morning. And we have somebody that's worked with Father Greg for a long time that's going to introduce them. So Father Chris, if you don't mind.
So good morning, and we're grateful that Greg is joining us this morning. And Greg, Father Greg, as I've said before, this is an amazing group of people who've been gathering for all these years, both for education and action. So we thank you for your past joining with us in many different events, Greg. This morning, I just want to note that at the core of what Father Greg is about is people, the humanity that other people have discarded. And we thank you for your many writings and preachings about the humanity of each person and the gift of each person. And we'd say this on a weekend in our tradition of All Saints, that we are all called to our best, and we celebrate you. So Greg was raised here in LA. He was a pastor of Dolores Mission here in Boyle Heights for many years. And from that experience and others, he was connected to LA General Hospital, sadly, because of all those who were being shot, those who were being injured, and the effects of violence. And that led him in 1988 to create what has become the international focus of possibilities of belief in another person's best, Homeboy Industries. Many of us, as several have said, have read some of his books: Tattoo of the Hearts, Barking of the Choir, The Royal Kingship, Radical Kingship, and The Champion of Change. And some of you came to know him recently when he became and received the Presidential Medal of Freedom. But more importantly, Greg is that person that believes in the other person. If you ever have a chance to go to Homeboys, you will see him in his glass office, because people are coming in just to let him know what's happening in their lives. So in the midst of the world of violence, Father Greg, you bring that message of hope, that message of solidarity. And so, Greg, thank you for joining us this morning for this conversation.
Thank you, Chris. I'm proud to call you my friend. Thank you all for your kind words. Based on that, I would ask you to lower your expectations. It was a great privilege as well that to call Jesse Jackson a friend. He would come to Dolores Mission and the Placita Olvera with Louis Olivares back in the day. So I don't know. I thank you for calling this a conversation. I would prefer it to be that. I'll say a few things, but and then I'd much rather engage whatever is on your mind. So I don't know. I think anything is a little bit like what Martin Luther King says about church. You know, it's the place. It's not the place you've come to, it's the place you go from. So our gathering this morning, it will always be the place that you're going to go from. And so the question always remains, we're going to go from here to do what? And how are we going to, choose to be in the world? And so, we want to go from here to reimagine something. We want to imagine a circle of compassion and then imagine that nobody's standing outside that circle. We want to know in the deepest part of us that the answer to every question indeed is compassion. We want to go from here, this morning gathering, as you meet every Friday, to go from here to dismantle the barriers that exclude. I think the only way to do it, frankly, is to situate ourselves at the margins. If we stand there, that's the only way they'll ever get erased. And that's important, it seems to me, because that broadens this notion of all the things that we think matter, like inclusion, nonviolence, unconditional loving kindness, and compassionate acceptance. So we want to go from our gathering here this morning to stand with the poor and the powerless and the voiceless. It's from that place that we will, create a community of kinship such that God might recognize it. We go from here to stand with those whose dignity has been denied and those whose burdens are more than they can bear. We stand with the easily despised and the readily left out, with the demonized so that the demonizing will stop. And we stand with those with the disposable so that the day will come when we stop throwing people away. And the goal is to create a community of cherished belonging. And so that kinship, I suspect if that was our goal, we would no longer be promoting justice. We'd be celebrating it. So at Homeboy, we kind of believe that systems change when people change, and people change when they're cherished. And 10,000 gang members, folks, a year walk through our doors in Chinatown in Los Angeles at our huge headquarters. And all of them are barricaded behind a wall of shame and disgrace. And the only thing that can scale that wall is tenderness. And they all come, I suspect, with what psychologists would call a disorganized attachment. Mom was either frightened or frightening. And you can't calm yourself down if you've never been soothed. A lot of them have spent so many years in prison. We've never seen that exactly before because of changes in laws. A lot of juveniles tried as adults are finally walking through our doors. But, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years in prison. And they always say the same thing. They say, we're used to being watched, but we're not used to being seen. And so you want to create a place where people are safe and then seen and then cherished. If it's true that the traumatized are likely perhaps to cause trauma, then it has to be equally true that the cherished will be able to find their way to the joy there is in cherishing themselves and others. So it's kind of like the Buddhist saying, you know, people are greeted and it's, oh, nobly born, remember who you really are. So we're all trying to walk each other home, as Ram Dass would say. We're all just trying to help each other discover our true selves in loving, and love never fails. So in the end, you kind of end up sort of having that become the marrow of what you believe. You know, I was, I can't remember, maybe a couple of years ago, I was speaking at the Los Angeles Times Festival of Books. I was on a panel with a rabbi and a columnist from the LA Times. And I can't remember what we were discussing exactly, but it was a packed auditorium. And I found myself saying, well, you know, at Homeboy, we embrace two principles. One, everyone is unshakably good. And two, we belong to each other. And then I said to the audience, now, do I think that every complex, vexing dilemma that faces us would dissipate if we embrace those two principles? And I said, yes, I do. And the entire audience burst into laughter, and I was kind of startled. And then when the laughter subsided, I said quietly, yes, I do. And I do. I mean, Homeboy, you know, does what it does, and it helps people. And it posits a notion. What if we were to invest in people rather than futilely trying to incarcerate our way out of every problem? So it does that. And it's kind of the front porch of the house everyone wants to live in. But it's also kind of taught me everything of value, because you have enemies, folks who used to shoot at each other, you know, are working side by side making croissants. So, and there's something about it that announces all sorts of other messages, like demonizing is the opposite of the truth. And you can't demonize people you know. And like Brian Stevenson says, you know, you put yourself in the vicinity of people, and then you kind of watch what happens. That human beings can't sustain a notion of us and them if you put people together. It's just not sustainable. And so we kind of discover that on a micro level. But, you know, and then, but then you can extrapolate. You know, the great John Lewis used to say, we all live in the same house. It's not aspirational. He doesn't say one day we may live in the same house. It's a declarative sentence. We all live in the same house. It doesn't make distinctions. It doesn't say, well, but some of us live in the basement and some of us live in the attic. No, we all live in the same house. It's the fact that it's such a declarative sentence that it has its power. It's our truth. And so how do you get to that place? So I think there's some kind of, you know, salvation or redemption or transformation that happens if we just locate ourselves at the margins, because that's how they'll get erased, so that we will have a world that's even more inclusive. A parentheses, I'm a Jesuit, like the Pope. I'm just saying, but and the homies don't really know what a Jesuit is. And Chris was mentioning my office, which is glass enclosed, and I can look out onto the floor of our reception area. And there are three of us who are Jesuits at Homeboy. Two are therapists. And I was sitting up behind my desk, and I had two homies in front of my desk. And we have like 8 tour groups a day from groups from all over the world. And I would invite you, if you're ever there, just go to the front desk and say, I'd like a tour, and someone will be dispatched to walk you through. The tours are quite wonderful. The homies give the tours. So anyway, I'm sitting there with two homies in front of my desk, and a tour group comes. It's like 20 people, and they just plant themselves in front of my office, and I wave faintly. And the tour guide is a guy named Osvaldo, who, as the homies would say, he has a loud ass voice. And he says, "This is Father Greg Boyle. He's the founder of Homeboy Industries. He is a jujitsu priest." And from my desk, I do all a kind of my best moves, and which reminds me that in 1540, St. Ignatius of Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits, enters this word in his spiritual diary, his journal, and he proceeds to use the word a lot for the remaining 12 years of his life. And he goes back before he dies, and he circles the word as many times as he used it. And I know Spanish, but I didn't know this word. And the word is acatamiento, and it comes from an archaic word, acatar, which means to look at something with attention. And though it was certainly born of his own singular mystical moment with his God, I think he wanted it to be something broader. And the word gets translated as affectionate awe. And I would want to suggest that that's our disposition and our stance at the margins, affectionate awe. It's a little bit like in the Acts of the Apostles, it says, and awe came upon everyone. And it seems to suggest that the measure of health in any community at all may well reside in our ability to stand in awe at what the poor have to carry, rather than stand in judgment at how they carry it. So I'm going to just tell a story, and then I hope that you can pull together whatever it is that's on your mind. So many years ago, I was invited to speak to 600 social workers in Richmond, Virginia. And it's what we used to call in those days a gang in-service. So they would, social workers would commandeer a hotel ballroom, and they'd sign in, and they'd be there from 9 to 5, and there'd be keynotes and workshops, breakout sessions, all trying to help social workers understand, why would a kid join a gang and what could you do? So it would talk about the lethal absence of hope so prevalent in the inner city, and how would we infuse hope to kids for whom hope is foreign, or how would we help heal a trauma, and how would we deliver mental health services in a timely and culturally appropriate way, things like that. So I'd done these things many times, and so I figured, I was going to give a keynote or something, and I said yes, and I bought my plane ticket. Well, a week before I was to fly to Richmond, Virginia, I pull out the letter that invited me just to see, what is this thing I'm doing? And to my horror, I discovered that I was to be the only speaker all damn day from 9 to 5. And I remember saying to myself, oh, hell no, I'm not going to be the only speaker. So I pulled 2 trainees in. Our program is an 18-month training program. So I pull in Andre, an African-American gang member, and his enemy, Jose. And they were like in their 9th month at Homeboy. And so I sit them down and I said, look, at the end of the week, you're flying with me to Richmond, Virginia. I'd like you to get up and, tell your story to 600 social workers. Take your time because we got a long ass day to fill. So Jose was the first one to get up, and I'd never heard his story before. And I guess he was like 25 years old. Shot caller from his gang, been to prison, tattooed. At Homeboy, you move to different places, different divisions, tattoo removal, legal, therapy. We have 13 social enterprises, businesses, bakery, restaurants. And at that juncture, Jose was a very valued member of our substance use disorder team, a man solid in his own recovery. And now he's helping younger homies and homegirls with their addiction issues. So not only had he been to prison and was a shot caller from his gang, he also had a long stretch as a homeless man, even longer stretch as a heroin addict. So he gets up in front of 600 social workers and he says, I guess you could say my mom and me, we didn't get along so good. I think I was 6 when she looked at me and she said, why don't you just kill yourself? You're such a burden to me. Well, 600 social workers audibly gasp. And then he says, it sounds way worser in Spanish. And we got whiplash going from gasp to laugh. And then he continued, I think I was 9 when my mom drove me down to the deepest part of Baja California, and she walks me up to an orphanage and she knocks on the door, and the guy comes to the door and she says, I found this kid. And she left me there for 90 days until my grandmother could get out of her where she had dumped me, and my grandmother came and rescued me. My mom beat me every single day of my elementary school years with things you could imagine and a lot of things you couldn't. Every day, my back was bloodied and scarred. In fact, I had to wear 3 t-shirts to school each day. Because the first t-shirt, you could see the blood still. Second t-shirt, you could still see it. Finally, the third t-shirt, you couldn't see any blood. Kids at school, they'd make fun of me. Hey, fool, it's 100 degrees. Why are you wearing 3 t-shirts? And then he stopped speaking, so overwhelmed with emotion. And he seemed to be staring at a piece of his story that only he could see. And when he could regain his speech, he said through his tears, I wore 3 t-shirts well into my adult years because I was ashamed of my wounds. I didn't want anybody to see them. But now I welcome my wounds. I run my fingers over my scars. My wounds are my friends. After all, how can I help heal the wounded if I don't welcome my own wounds? And awe came upon everyone. Acatamiento, affectionate awe. The measure of our compassion lies not in our service of those on the margins, but only in our willingness to see ourselves in kinship with them. For the truth of the matter is this: if we don't welcome our own wounds, we may well be tempted to despise the wounded. So you're gathering here this morning, as with every Friday, is not the place you've come to. It was always going to be the place you go from. And maybe we all brace ourselves a little bit when we get ourselves to the margins, because people will accuse us of wasting our time there. But the prophet Jeremiah writes, "For in this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing." Well, that's all I got.
So, yeah. Thank you, Father Boyle. It was funny when you were talking about doing one of those all-day seminars and not knowing about it. As I helped with the John Coltrane Festival in LA, and for some reason, I ended up being the host. And this was at the Wiltern Theater. It was a really big deal. And I was introducing this band, great players, Joe Henderson. And as I was walking off stage, an amp blows. See the smoke on the other side, and and then they said, come back and do 10 more minutes. This is with the stage managers. 10 more minutes. So I got to the point where I was almost tap dancing before they fixed it. So I know what you mean about that kind of dread. Um, but it's inspiring that what you do is I posted in the invite this quote by this writer named Austin O'Malley: "Practical prayer is harder on the soles of your shoes than on the knees of your trousers." And I think the work that you do is the embodiment of that. That's the prayer, is the work, the taking your life to be able to change other people's lives. So and you can put your hands up if you can do it on the screen with the utility that you have there. It's under those three dots that say more, under reactions. If you can do that, that would be great. So we'll start with Jasmine, if you can make your question or comment.
Hi, Father Boyle, I am indebted to you. You're a role model, a mentor, and I look up to you every day. I do, because your book has touched not only my soul, but my life. I want to know what your thoughts are on incarcerated women, cis-impacted women, and how we as people can help them, not only with anti-recidivism, but in society, be accepted.
Thank you for your question. When Homeboy Industries was born in 1988, it wouldn't have occurred to anybody to call it I mean, we called it Homeboy Industries just because gang members were 95% male. And then now cut to today, gang members are like 97% male. So, at Homeboy, in order to work there, you have to, if you're a male, you have to be a gang member. But if we put that restriction on women, then we wouldn't have any women. So we changed really early on kind of our mission statement to include felons. Otherwise, we wouldn't have any women. Now we're like 50-50. But, you know, it's always been, it's interesting that there are very few female gang members, but there's been quite an increase in women being sent to prison and being locked up. Having said that, there's still very few facilities for women, and obviously the vast majority are for men. I remember I was on a commission for the California Youth Authority, and we went around to all the facilities. And in those days, there was only one facility for women and like 12 for men all over the state. And the women facility had so many more, it had access to greater mental health services, because these were really wounded, physically abused, sexually abused in every way, females. And so they had kind of access to more services just because the need was so great. Having said that, at Homeboy, you know, women come in large numbers because they're kind of more amenable to taking steps, you know, to walk towards health and their own healing, much more so than guys are. And but it's still true. I mean, we have a huge mental health department, and I'm happy for the first time in our 36-year history, we have a waiting list for people to see a therapist, which wasn't true in the early days. We never forced therapy, but people weren't inclined, gang members weren't inclined to seek help. And now we have 2 psychiatrists and a lot of therapists, and it's still, we have a waiting list, which is unique in our history. So yeah, I mean, again, like anything, you know, I'm looking at Prop 36, you know, and we had a press conference yesterday about no on 36, and to echo Kamala Harris, we won't go back, you know, and Prop 47 started to relax kind of this notion. And so we still have to embrace smart on crime. We still want to get underneath. The homies always talk about find the thorn underneath. And I learned that early on. You know, I could have denounced gang violence, but I learned early on that that was a kind of a silly, futile thing, because gang violence was a language. It pointed beyond itself. It was an indicator. Gang violence was the cough that pointed you to the lung cancer. Then you kind of say, well, I'm going to address the lung cancer. That feels smart to me. Then you cure the cancer and you calm the cough. That's a pretty good deal. So, you know, we don't want to go back. We don't want to go back to, you know, creating systems that harm people and communities and families. And what if we chose to heal wound rather than continue to punish it? And so I think that's the issue, you know, with women as much as with men. But yeah, all hands on deck. The more people can show up in the lives of each other and be loving, caring adults who pay attention, that's going to benefit everybody. That's the best anti-recidivism stance there is, I think.
Sounds good. Thank you, sir. Carol Francis, you had your hand up.
Actually, I besides saying I recommend Tattoos on the Heart to everybody who wants to read something that not only tells you how bad the system is, but also gives you what is the awe?
Affectionate awe.
Affectionate awe in all these stories. Anyway, I was going to ask about homegirls, but Jasmine already asked. So I want to tell you, I was coming home from Chinatown the area, and I went to Homegirl Cafe and bought the book, Tattoos on the Heart. I was taking the train home, and at that time, the train station plaza hosted a farmer's market, which had a Homeboys booth selling your bread. And I pulled out this book and I said, "This is what I just bought at your store." And he said, "Oh, yeah, I'm so and so." And he told me the name that he was, his story in there. So, can you tell us about, um, you used to have Homeboys, that was one of the two farmers markets that had Homeboys booth, and I haven't seen them. Have you stopped doing that? Because it was a great way for people to find out about what you're doing.
We still have the farmers markets, but they're kind of moved around, and some of them have been eliminated and some of them have been added. So
is there a listing somewhere?
There probably is on our website. I'm only the founder. I don't really know very much. I'm the last person to know anything.
I like that. I'm going to use that next time I have to answer a question about something. So thank you as well.
Greg, thank you as always. With this group, I'd just like to invite your reflections on how we who are working with the larger issue of the Middle East and especially Gaza and Israel, and what would be your read on how we can be part of a solution that recognizes in the midst of such pain and history, awe. And I read in the Catholic Worker the other day that a group of folks did go to the border at Gaza in Israel and did a interfaith prayer service and were taken away by the Israeli guards. They weren't arrested, but they just were removed. So I just trying to figure out for this group, maybe some of the wonderful, principles that you spoke of. How do we help translate that into something that's seemingly so out of control also?
Yeah, I think the problem comes sometimes when we want to address something that's larger, because then we want to go to this larger place, and I still kind of believe in movement, that it's kind of like Mother Teresa's, we're not called to do great things, but small things with great love. I kind of feel like kind of the small thing with great love is the movement, because then we're impatient with the small thing with great love and we want to move immediately to the larger thing. How do we transform larger dilemmas? I still think they all get transformed if people trust that, that love never fails. I mean, again, I don't know if it's a tactical hope or a strategic thing, or where should we go, or what we should do. I just think it's, in the end, it's about one foot in front of the next, and what's the next loving thing that I can do. Otherwise, you eliminate the kind of small loving thing because we're not patient. And I recognize that it's a dire situation, but I think in terms of, you support the people who have a more inclusive, more nonviolent, more loving and compassionate stance. But I also don't think we name things correctly. I was on a Zoom yesterday and where somebody was talking about Netanyahu, and a whole cast of characters. And I for me, it's kind of about health. Nobody healthy invades Ukraine. nobody disregards the humanitarian crisis for all Gazans, and the list goes on, so I don't know. Otherwise, it's us and them, and it's demonizing, and I'm not interested. Because in the end, that's all part of what plagues us anyway. I don't think Donald Trump is a bad person. You don't need to be a psychiatrist to know that he's ill, but you do have to be well to know that he isn't. And so naming things is always kind of an important piece of it,
Sure.
And I look at, when people, protest or take a stand against Netanyahu in Israel, I think, I think that's where we would all be, because that's all part of the movement, to create a community of cherished belonging. I don't know a strategy more than that, except to, part of the thing about cherishing love is cherishing is love with its sleeves rolled up. Otherwise love stays in your head or in the air, or it wanders to your heart, but unless it makes its way to your feet, then there's no connective tissue. And so, yeah, I'm probably not good on strategy. I just know you want to stay faithful. And part of our issue, I think, sometimes is we're impatient with fidelity because we just want to get to effective. We want to get to successful. And I don't think we're called to be successful. We're just called to be faithful in terms of a strategy and a way of being and a stance at the margins that puts one foot in front of the next. I don't know. I don't have a good answer on that.
I appreciate, and I think of you in the context of, when we deal with these kind of issues like Gaza and the Middle East, as you were drawn into this gang situation because of Dolores Mission and the location and the people that were being killed, we have the same dynamic of there are people dying at the moment by great numbers, and I think the Mother Teresa idea is ideal, but then how do you deal with that in the context of, as we were dealing with here at LA General, at the high numbers of people that were getting killed and affected by the gang violence. So I appreciate, and I know there's no perfect simple answer.
But I also think, Chris, that's a good point, because I discovered early on, with 8 gangs at war with each other in my parish, I did all sorts of things in my early days. I did shuttle diplomacy, and I did peace treaties and truces and ceasefires. And I always say the same thing. I don't regret that I ever did that, and I'd never do it again. Mainly because it served the cohesion of the gangs, and it was kind of an oxygen that was being supplied to the violence, actually. Because then it was like, well, what's the conflict? Why would I be engaged in conflict resolution? Because there is no conflict. There's violence, but there's no conflict in gang violence. But I'm not sure that parallel works in the Middle East. And that's where I get stumped, because, I would say the violence in East LA was about something else. It was about a lethal absence of hope.
Mm.
So the trick was impact the hope and the despair and watch what happens to the violence. And maybe that parallel works in the Middle East, because certainly there's a question of justice, and somehow people have a right to live and to raise their kids and to make enough money to provide. And if you changed that part of the equation, wouldn't you be changing something significant? So I think that's true. Or you look at any other, like the troubles in Northern Ireland, and is it true, just like with gang violence, that I remember Padre Otama says that the troubles, it was about belonging gone wrong. And I always thought, well, that's what gang violence was about. It was belonging gone wrong. Well, then how do you create and foster belonging gone right? And so complicated.
We have many other questions. Thanks for the dialogue, Greg.
Sure.
Thank you. Yeah. It struck me when you were speaking about, I had a problem with one person in particular that I've never met that has, let's just say, been in the news pretty recently, maybe the last 8, 10 years. And my feelings about him being just the embodiment of evil. And a couple months ago, I was listening to an interview with one of my favorite musicians, a gentleman named Nick Cave. And he was talking about how his view changed when he didn't see people as evil anymore. There were degrees and amounts of suffering. And when I started to look at stuff like that, it got me thinking that, more than thinking about this person as evil, I just think about I wouldn't want to spend a second being that person. Because can you just imagine being in that head for any amount of time? But secondly, the otherness tends to get mitigated, and there's less division between one person and another. So that stuck with me very much. Steve, you had your hand up.
Thank you. Greg, thank you so much. I keep notes on these meetings and my page is full of notes. I wanted to weave two questions together because even before you mentioned Trump, I had made a note that you said everyone is unshakably good. And I want to say here as chair of ICUJP that as a 501c3 organization, we do not endorse candidates for elective office. We do take positions on propositions, and toward the end of this meeting, Rick will remind folks of the recommendations that ICUJP has taken on certain propositions. But what I'm asking you is related to a notion of love thy enemy. And you said everyone is unshakably good, but that Trump is ill. So how do we reconcile our deep anger at political leaders and our views of them with the command to love thy enemy? And then I think it's related. How do we talk to family members who feel differently than us, whether it's a political candidate or the war in Gaza? So I hope those are related and give you something to respond to.
Yeah, again, for 40 years, I've walked with gang members, so they've taught me everything of value. And it's from them that I've learned just from my own. I've never met an evil person, ever. And for 40 years, I've worked with gang members. Maybe maybe I might have. No, I've met deeply traumatized people, deeply wounded people, hugely mentally ill people, but I've never met an evil person ever. So if you say that somebody is unshakably good, as I do, and in Buddhists we'll talk about essential goodness and things like that. I always think that's kind of hedging our bets. I say that's why I say unshakably good. Now, knowing that goodness is everything. I had a homie the other day say to me, he goes, I think life is just letting the blindfold fall. And I said, that's pretty good. Well, what do you see? I asked him. What do you see when the blindfold falls? And he thinks for a second, he put his hand on his chest and he said, goodness. Exactly. So you can say that everybody is unshakably good, which I believe they are, but seeing it and allowing the blindfold to fall, or having us help each other have that moment of transformation and healing, that's everything. And so gang members don't walk into Homeboy Industries bad and they leave 18 months later good. They were always unshakably good. But because none of us are well until all of us are well, we need help walking home to wholeness. And it's the relationship that heals. And so the more that we can be engaged in relational wholeness with each other, then the more that we can, know that the answer to every question is compassion. And we can find ourselves in kinship with everybody. So sometimes we settle for forgiveness when we should hold out for mercy. A homeboy emailed me and he said, all this talk about forgiveness, he goes, I don't like forgiveness. He goes, there's too much back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. I just want forth, he said. And then he said, fourth is mercy. And I said, that's brilliant. And that's true. So, yeah, love your enemies. I always think Jesus wants us to do them one better, which is don't have any enemies. Why would you have enemies? Why would there be this us and them? Us and them is always the opposite of truth, the opposite of how God sees. And that's the danger. The danger is oppositional. The opposite of hate is not love. The opposite of hate is health, because nobody healthy in the history of the world has ever hated. It's not bad people hate. No healthy person has ever been a racist. I don't believe that's ever happened. And so Matthew Dowd, who's a commentator, said that 1/3 of the American people do not believe that all men and women are created equal. Well, who are those people? Are they stupid? Are they bad? I don't think you can be a healthy person and hold that view. So how do we help people move towards wholeness? I like that better than opposing bad people so that they will somehow become good. That doesn't feel very sophisticated to me.
That sounds very logical. So Don, I know you're working as an air traffic controller, it looks like.
No, I'm in San Francisco helping my daughter move. She has a bunch of stairs. Um, that's real. I love what you had to say. It was really good. I facilitate and run a group in Santa Cruz called Men Overcoming Abusive Behaviors. We kind of pull stuff from the Oakland Project and men's work. And I grew up down in LA. So I come from a background where I had a really hard time understanding feelings without violence, things like that. And I've been doing this group for like 15 years now. And one of the things I noticed, and I thought maybe you might be able to answer the question, is when guys come to my group for the first time, they're not really in touch with their feelings. And the more we just sit in the group and discuss things, the more the men's defenses come down and they start getting in touch with their feelings. And I think this overcoming abusive behavior stuff for me is like a lifelong journey. I go to that group every week and still get enlightened. When when the men or women come out of your group, do they still participate in groups when they're done going through your program? And it seems to me that we can never not learn enough about our abusive behaviors. And I was just wondering if there's a follow-up group that the members can go to for like a lifetime drop-in meeting. Does that
Yeah,
make any sense?
Homeboy sort of becomes more home than home, so people return all the time, and so we have ongoing meetings. And so once you get a dose of being cherished, it's a pretty compelling thing. So you don't really disappear. And they're there for 18 months, and then we try to find them a job beyond Homeboy. But so 18 months is 18 months. It's the time it takes for an infant to attach to a caregiver. So it's essentially about attachment repair. But it's essential if you surrender to this kind of foundational healing. Then what happens? After 18 months, you leave Homeboy, and the world's going to throw at you what it will. But this time you're not going to be toppled by it because you're sturdy and you're resilient, knowing that healing ends in the graveyard. But if there's a kind of, once you're connected in relational wholeness to a community that honors you, then that's a thing that carries you in your whole life. And people always try to stay connected to that.
Right. Thank you. If Yanni, I know you had a question.
Definitely, definitely. Just want to say thank you for this wonderful message. It was filled with so much wisdom. I was wondering if you could speak towards the importance of voting no on Proposition 36, because I believe your organization has received some of the funding from the passing of Prop 47. So if you could speak towards that, as I think that's one of the propositions that's missing in the recommendation. If you could speak towards that, that'd be greatly appreciated.
Yeah, so we, as I mentioned, we had a press conference yesterday on voting no on Prop 36, and we had a bunch of people there, and so it was a way to kind of reaffirm that we were moving in the right direction with Proposition 47. So you don't want to succumb to a sense of overwrought fear, especially at a time when actually crime is decreasing. And that you want to keep a very sophisticated kind of sense on how to address crime in the first place. How do you address what undergirds all crime anyway? So anyone who's kind of tough on crime, I suspect, is not very serious about actually reducing it. So, but it's tough because fear-mongering is kind of what happens these days, and you don't want to fall prey to it. So, and as you say correctly, these are all resources that can be directed to preventing, preventing mass incarceration, and that's always been proven to be ineffective and futile. So we don't want to embrace the old tired ways of proceeding. So it's perfectly okay for all of us as members of the Los Angeles community to imagine the day when policing is obsolete and prisons are empty. These are things that you work towards. And it's important to kind of conjure up images of that in your heart, and then you work towards that.
Phil, you had your hand up. Any question or comment?
Yeah, thank you, Rick. See how best you're going to handle on this. in my experience and view of the world, I think of Homeboy as a unique thing that I don't see anywhere else. And I don't know if it's happening spontaneously in other places. I know you can't go open a franchise in San Francisco, but what do you see in terms of people who are trying a similar approach in other places?
Yeah, so in 2008, we had a delegation from Wichita, stakeholders like the chief of police and the mayor and all this group of people, and they wanted us to airlift Homeboy into Wichita. And that was at that moment we had to kind of say, do we want to do that? You know, do we want to become the McDonald's of gang intervention programs? And so we decided not to do that. Instead, we said, well, we'll offer you technical assistance. We'll help you start something that is organic and from below, like Homeboy was. And so they started a thing called the Center Cafe. And now I think they have two of them. And again, it's the same principles, enemies, rivals, working together in a restaurant. So, and now we have what we call the Global Homeboy Network. So there are 300 programs in the United States modeled on our methodology and our way of proceeding in the United States and 50 outside the country. So you have Braveheart Industries in Glasgow, Scotland, and another program in Sydney that works with a disaffected street kids, and Rise Up Industries in San Diego. So they all can say that they're a partner in the global Homeboy network. And we meet every summer for 3 days, and all the partners who can come gather. What's evolved, whereas it sort of began with gang members, and then it moved to returning citizens. And now there isn't a complex, vexing social dilemma that we need to address that hasn't gathered in our global Homeboy network. So, you know, people wanting to deal with the unhoused or with mental health population or substance abuse disorder. So all those kinds of social dilemma, it's sort of, you know, we all share the same thing, which is a culture of a community where people feel cherished, safe, seen, cherished. And now let's address, you know, the issue. So, but a lot of them all have kind of social enterprises connected to it. And yeah. But we don't have any, I don't have to worry about, you know, the budget of Rise Up Industries in San Diego. They're all independent.
Thank you for that.
That's good to know. I'm sure Braveheart Industries in Glasgow is going to be very interesting. Uh, but I'm going to take Anthony's question next. But before that, I have to head out for an appointment with for my dad. So I'm leaving you in the capable hands of Mr. Rohde and Ms. Likens. So thank you very much, and it's been an honor to be able to be here for this. So thank you. But Anthony, please go ahead.
Yes, I'm going to ask two questions. One on behalf of my wife, who is celebrating her birthday today, and she hasn't gotten dressed. So she wants me to ask her question, and I have a question. Her question is pretty straightforward. She sees a Homeboy Industries in airports selling stuff. So could you say something about that? And then I want to ask another question.
Yeah, well, we used to have two restaurants, one at Terminal 4 at American Airlines and one at Terminal 3 at Delta in Los Angeles. And Terminal 4, they shut down all the eateries there because they're trying to reconfigure the airport. And I'm not sure exactly what they're doing, but they shut all of them down there in this one corridor, which was very sad because we had a beautiful mural, like kind of a Michelangelo ceiling mural painted by our resident artist, Fabian Debora. So anyway, but the odd thing about the airport is it really is just a branding kind of thing. It uses our name, but because none of our folks can work there, they can fly, but they can't work at the airport because of their records. So it's a kind of a peculiar thing. I mean, it generates funds
It does.
that we need, but it's still peculiar.
So I have a question. My wife and I work a lot with housing issues, trying to advocate for affordable housing. Over my life, I've worked a lot directly with people who've experienced homelessness. And just as you say about gang members, as we get to know people who've lived on the street and get to understand their hearts and their stories, our attitudes change and we learn a lot from them. I think I've learned more about faith and God from my unhoused neighbors than from people in my church. So, so my question, and it kind of revolves around, you're talking about evil. And for me, evil is all about lies and deception, and including self-deception. And how do we dispel myths that people have, particularly in our case, we try to deal with how do we dispel myths about people who are unhoused. They're not really homeless. They actually are homeless, unhoused neighbors. They live in our community for long periods of time. So we try to dispel myths about our unhoused neighbors because we know them and we are our neighbors. How do you dispel myths about people who are gang members? And I know you do that so well, but maybe you could say a little bit about, especially decision makers and the people who are hard to get to reach because of their misconceptions.
Well, in the same way you say with the unhoused, because you know them, and that informs how you speak about the issue. And so that's a similar thing, I suppose. In my early years, 35 years ago, I'd give talks and I remember I was kind of shaking my fist more than anything, mainly because, these were deaths that were happening in East LA and in South Central, and it didn't matter to people. And their lives didn't count for much, which is why I always counted the number. I've buried 261 people killed because of gang violence, and I number them because traditionally they've never really mattered to the rest of the city. So, but I don't give talks like that anymore where I shake my fist. I was young and didn't understand really. So, I don't want to win an argument. I don't want to be oppositional. You just want to, tell the truth and be loving and merciful and somehow invite people. So in the end, you're inviting people to understand that love is never a false doctrine, and you want people to discover that loving is their home. And once people know that, then they're never homesick. And so that's kind of our true selves in loving. And then that's where the joy is. So you're always inviting people to the joy there is in knowing the truth of who they are, So I don't shake my fist at anybody anymore. I did when I had hair.
Thank you both. Let's not get into hair. Greg. Carol Francis, shall I do that?
Thanks, Steve. Good morning, Father Greg. So delighted to wake up this morning and have my coffee with you and the beloved community of ICUJP. So thank you for being here. I've been thinking a lot about hope. And I was struck by something you said earlier that someone from Homeboy said, an absence of hope is a lethal condition. And Seamus Haney says something about this. Hope is not optimism, which expects things to turn out well, but something rooted in the conviction that there is good worth working for. I wondered if you'd be willing to comment further on that in your experience.
Yeah, I talk about gang violence as a lethal absence of hope. And I say that because nobody's ever met a hopeful kid who joined a gang. So, and that was a counterpose to, people said bad kids do bad things, bad kids join gangs. No hopeful kid has ever joined a gang. So then that tells you if you infuse hope to kids for whom hope is foreign, then that will work because it helps, and everything that helps works. So in the delivery system of hope are folks who are the proud owners of a pulse. So every human being can be that channel of hope. And what is it that supplies hope? Initially, it's just loving, caring adults who pay attention and show up. And it's pretty much it. We think hope comes by way of advice or words. But, the great American poet, Mary Oliver, who died at 83, she said she had only learned 3 things in her long 83-year life. And that was 1, pay attention, 2, be astonished, and 3, share your astonishment. And of course, she was so rooted in nature and a kind of a appreciation for nature. But I think that's also true about humans, if we just paid attention to each other. I would say, you become the notice of God. You notice the notice of God, then you become that in the world. And we're noticing people. And because people go so unnoticed that, so you receive the tender glance, you become the tender glance in the world. This is transformational, I think, if we all embraced it. So, but yes, I think hope is everything. And I don't believe in false hope. Hope is hope, and it doesn't need to be the whole thing. We always think it is. And that's why I always tell my staff, I want us to be allergic to no. Just, it's the people who somebody comes into your office and you say to them, the answer to your question is yes. Now what's the question? Because, all we're asked to do is just do the next loving, concretely helpful thing. And the more we can pull that off, then the more we are, delivery systems for hope for each other.
Thanks, Greg.
Could you say
hope
again? Who was it that said the 3 things she had learned in her life?
Mary Oliver.
Oliver. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Father Greg. I am so grateful to God that He showed me He notices me through having come upon your work and your life. Prior to this conversation this morning, and hearing the story about the homie that helped with the 600 social workers. I have you pinned on my screen. I don't see Father Greg. At any rate, I'll go ahead. Prior to this, hearing that story, I would have said I have very little in common with that person, that homie. And as I sit here with my homeboy mug, I have this mug because it says on the other side, you are exactly what God had in mind when he met you, Father Greg Boyle. The homie wanted to be cherished. I want to be cherished. We have mother wounds. We have all kinds of wounds. So all of the notions of otherness that we have talked about on this call today are just collapsing because I have this because I needed it, not because it was simply a good way to give some money to Homeboy. And I think I'm just so present to the fact that whether I'm talking about Palestine or Valerie sitting here in this room, we all want to be cherished. And I thank you for your presence, your work. And I thank God that he notices me. And then I take your coaching, then I need to go out and become the notice of God in my world. So thank you. Amen.
Excellent.
Heather.
Thank you. I just wanted to let you know, Father Greg, that my heart still goes out to your cause. It's like anytime you speak, it's so deeply touching. What I wanted to know is your organization open to volunteers? Like, let's say I have a workshop idea and I am local. Are you open to that, or is there a huge waiting list?
Well, we're trying to regroup since the pandemic. We had 350 volunteers at that point. And then it just kind of shut down. So we've been gradually returning. So, just email me at gboyle@homeboyindustries.org, and I'll connect you to the person in charge of volunteers.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, I've
Okay.
gone on quite a journey with some training, which I could discuss with that person. So I feel like it would be, I could contribute, and I feel like it'd be something I'd like to participate in if they're open to it.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
That's very helpful. Something ICUJP prides itself on is a clearinghouse and a connection of networking. Let's have the last question or comment from Bob Zaw.
I have a question for Father Boyle. As I see it, some of the problem in this country is baked into the Constitution with the inequality for people of color. And so what we have is a problem of men controlling women, through the abortion problems and so on. And above, at the very top of men, it's white men controlling. And that's kind of the battle that's going on now. And this is the most quotable hour I've ever heard at ICUJP. And can you apply some of these things you've told us to this problem of power without evolving into hatred and so on?
Well, I think, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, I think the problem comes when we identify things incorrectly, or not as fully as we could. I remember do you remember the time, maybe it was during the pandemic, when a man assaulted an elderly Asian woman on the streets in San Francisco. And they were talking about Asian hate crime. And because of the work I do and the population, you know, I don't think it had anything to do with hate or even Asian. I think it had to do with we're in the grip of a mental health crisis in our country. And I think that's a different way of seeing things. You know, it doesn't co-sign on violent behavior, but it leads you to an open, compassionate heart. At the same time, I was at Chicago Midway Airport, and I saw a young woman with a T-shirt that said, "Love, not hate." And I remember looking at the shirt, and my immediate reaction was, "Oh, that's why we don't make progress." And it seemed like an odd thing for me to immediately think of. And I thought it's because it names things wrong. You know, it's not about hate, it's about health. How do we help each other? In the same airport, I saw an older woman with a huge sweatshirt on, and it had one word, and it said unwell. And I thought to myself, yes, finally, progress, you know. And I thought that was kind of said the whole thing for me. Because if it's love, not hate, then it's us and them, and that's why we don't make progress. It's still othering. It still says I'm on the side of those who love, and you are on the side of those who hate. It's just an eternal spinning of wheels. So the more that we can, again, I think you can draw a straight line from thinking that everybody's unshakably good and we belong to each other. It's the only thing that allows us to roll up our sleeves. Otherwise, we don't make progress. It's just us and them. And that will always keep us from progressing. So there are a million things that need to be addressed, but our starting point is we're in this together and everybody's doing the best they can. But none of us are well until all of us are.
Thank you. If Anthony and Bob will take their hands down, I won't get any confusion. Well, here at ICUJP, you know, cherishing is love with your sleeves rolled up. I love that. And our group has rolled up its sleeves for these 23 years. And we're so grateful to you, Greg, for today. And more than that, for every day that you wake up, you do the work you do, you inspire others to do good work. So I have the capacity as chair to grant you the status of a card-carrying member of ICUJP.
Thank you.
And you are welcome to return here every Friday morning that you can, if you want to join us and share your wisdom and insights. This was a conversation, and we love that here. Thank you, everybody. Greg, if you'd give us a final word and send us off for the week ahead.
Okay. Loving Creator, we praise you and we thank you for inviting us to gather in this community, beloved, this community of cherished belonging. We ask that you fill us with a longing to be in the world who you are, compassionate, loving and kind, spacious and expansive. You who love us without measure and without regret. Help us to create a place recognizable in its kinship and its relational wholeness and in its connection to each other. May we stand with those who suffer and those who are excluded so that our hearts can be altered in their presence. And we make this prayer in your name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all.
Amen. Thank you, everybody. Let's go forth this
Amen.
week.